Last family on this topic is called Apocynaceae, and this is one that's pretty diverse worldwide, kind of fits into this big families category. We have some locally, and we also have lots of them represented in dry environments like this. So this is a group that's fairly abundant in desert habitats. They've got a few strategies. You can see on the left here is a stem succulent, and on the right, this is a woody plant that's got kind of a fatter base. That's a water storage strategy as well. And the ones locally are herbaceous, all of them. And they also have milky sap. So if you encountered one of these, probably not out in the field unless you go to Africa or something. But you probably not run into these outdoors, but you might have them in cultivation. You say, well, do I have one of these stem succulents from the various categories? We saw different stem succulents, and we also saw before the Euphorbiaceae had that milky sap, and they could be stem succulents. So potential overlap in features there. Much different flowers though here in Apocynaceae, with much more traditional perianth, at least relative to Euphorbiaceae. So that would help you to know those apart. They have opposite leaves or whorled leaves, locally many opposite leaves, simple leaves, entire leaves. So fairly useful actually as it comes to the leaves. The family's name for this genus, Apocynaceae, which goes by the name of dogbane. And there's also another group, the milkweeds, which belong to this family. In older literature, they're going to include a family called Asclepiadaceae. And that's a family name based on this genus name for the milkweed genus Asclepias. And that's now been included within Apocynaceae. In current treatments, you'll probably find it that way. Another case, this is not a distant relative, not terribly distant from Rubiaceae that we just looked at. And that one also had cyme inflorescences. So I've got a cyme inflorescence here. I don't know if either of my illustrations is showing it very well, but you'd be looking for those older flowers closer to the center of the inflorescence. So I mentioned the milkweeds. Interesting crossovers with other groups. So the milkweeds overlap with the orchids. Milkweeds are eudicots and orchids are monocots, but they share this feature, this highly derived feature of these pollen packets with sticky connections. So very much like we saw in the orchids. So these are pollen packets, and they're picked up by animals as they're foraging in these rather different looking flowers. They've got this coronal appendage here. This they call it horns sometimes. So corona is like not exactly, it's sort of in between corolla, which are the petals, and the andrecium, the stamen. So sometimes there's an extra level of organization. It's an organ, but it's not really one of these traditional organ types in the flower. So sometimes you rarely see it, but in groups that have it, you'll see it called this corona. And that's where these horns kind of show up. And that's little pockets in there. This is where the reproductive organs kind of hide out. So similar to the orchids where they had their reproductive organs kind of finely placed. Same thing here. The animals will put their feet in to kind of grip onto the flowers. And in that space, they get the pollinia attached to them. So this bee has really been productive in getting covered in pollinia, and then as it sticks its limbs into different flowers, it's going to be able to drop off that pollen as well. So similar strategy where the pollen packets allow them to transfer lots and lots of pollen all at once. So it's kind of an all or nothing pollination. So for one of those pollen packets, that's the output of a single stamen, all that into one place. So when fertilization happens, it can happen a lot. And if it doesn't happen, then it's none. So a little bit sort of all or nothing. All right, so milkweed subfamily. So I said formerly Asclepiadaceae, now a subfamily of Apocynaceae called Asclepiadoideae. Nice feature in the reproduction of these plants, the flowers or the fruits, develop into follicles. And these follicles break open to release seeds that have hairs on them. So in the milkweeds, you can see that quite nicely. You might be familiar with these. Seed is here, and then it's got this tuft of hair that helps it to blow around in the wind. And then the follicle inflorescence that breaks open just along one side Pretty similar. So you can kind of see, even though these were traditionally in different families, they're very similar fruit types, even though their flowers are quite different. So kind of an interesting structure that they have. They have two carpels in the per flower, and the carpels are fused at the tip, but not lower down. So this one, the illustration at the left here really shows it pretty nicely, where you can see two of these really long follicles. They look like beans. They're joined to the base. That's the base of a receptacle of one flower, and they're separate, except they weren't entirely separate in the flower. So they're kind of joined at the tip. They can break apart as they mature and dry out, but kind of an interesting odd feature for a gynoecium to be fused only at the tips and not really at the base where the ovaries are. Follicles often paired. Kind of a misleading photo here. Each of these is resulting from one flower, but they are shown as a pair here. So probably should clarify that image a little bit. Lots of interesting ecology with the milkweeds. These are a very successful group, a diverse group, and they get a lot of attention for their association with monarch butterflies. So monarch butterflies feed upon milkweeds. They can pollinate them. They can drink the nectar. The more important association of monarch butterflies is that they can lay their eggs on on milkweeds, and their caterpillars, these brightly colored monarch butterfly caterpillars, are able to eat milkweeds, even though they have this toxic sap. So they have strategies to kind of eat their way around the sap, and then also to, within their body, to be able to withstand the toxins, and in turn makes them toxic to animals that want to eat them. So they can afford to be brightly colored, because if a bird eats one of these, it's going to get the toxins. Same thing with quite a few other animals that associate on milkweed. So this is a milkweed bug. There are milkweed beetles and so on, and a lot of them are this bright color where they have the same strategy of associating or concentrating toxins in their bodies. And more widely, lots of culturally important and ecologically and economically important plants. One of these that I have listed here, talk about this one. This is a genus called Catharanthus, and this is the source of an anti-cancer drug. And it's kind of an interesting connection that we often see, where plant toxins, these very potent molecules, they have an important influence on biological processes. Sometimes they can kill you or be distasteful or mess with your digestion or something. But every once in a while, especially through chemistry, we can take these and kind of modify them or figure out how to use them to our advantage. And this turned out to be a pretty effective cancer treatment. So toxins in one sense can be bad for the individual, but they can also be bad for cancer cells. So that's a good strategy here. All right, so going back, this is one that I have mentioned here, this Madagascar periwinkle is the source of that drug. Also a plant people have for an ornamental plant. We might see in lab this wax plant we've encountered. Oleander, this is an ornamental shrub that people grow in drier places of the world. It's cultivated in like the Southwest and I think California of the United States, and also very toxic. So a lot of members of this family, pretty toxic. You don't want to mess with these. Probably keep your kids away from this kind of plant. As far as I know, not one that people are really growing in Wisconsin. I don't know if it handles our winters. Others, vinca, this is a ground cover that people grow around here. Periwinkle, and then this plumeria. This is a kind of a characteristic tropical flower. You might see it as an icon on various tropical destinations and so on.